Come what may, bring it on. I'm gonna love it.
Welcome to LDS Unmarried Life, a podcast for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who find themselves single either because they're divorced, widowed, or not yet married, and there is no affiliation with the church. This podcast can be found on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube. And first, before we get started, I have a question I want to shout out to my readers and see if you all have any input, or listeners. You might read some of my blog posts too, but mostly your listeners. Anyway, I'm getting ready to talk with Jim here, and he gave me a question in between recording episodes, and I thought I would pass it on to you. And this is the question. Do you think I should rename my podcast to reflect the directive from the prophet about how we should talk about the church using its full name? And if so, what do you think that name should be? And how can it make it small enough to fit in the title of a podcast title? You know, like members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who are single members of the church. I don't know. I have not come up with a good answer, but I would love to hear from you. And you can send me your input at Annette@AnnetteTalks.com, or you can send me an email through AnnetteTalks.com, or what would really be great is if you went to my Facebook page, a Facebook/Annette Talks, and weigh in there. I would love to hear some ideas. And now we are joined again by Jim Jacobs, who was with me for the last episode. We've done some dating coaching episodes, but today we're going to shift gears and talk about something else. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here with you again. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And again, remind us what your licensure is and where you can be reached.
I am Jim R. Jacobs. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and so happy to be doing this with you. This is so needed and so important. I provide counseling and coaching, dating coaching, relationship coaching. I also am a marriage educator, and I am a Daring Way facilitator in the work of Brene Brown, helping people to live more authentic, creative, playful, and integrous lives, living according to their values, maybe jumping off the rat race of trying to prove that we're worthy or good enough or enough kind of things. And so I hope that you'll look me up, JimRJacobs.com, or Driving Lessons for Life, FOR Life. That's the title of my book. Love to hand deliver you a copy of my book if you're interested in that. But please let me know how I can help.
And if you're local, right? I don't think you're going to be flying out to California to hand deliver a book.
That'd be fun to do. I might consider it.
So DrivingLessonsForLife.com is your other website. Great.
Yes, correct. Thank you.
All right. And so this is going to be a kind of a heavy topic, but I want to talk about this because I've had listeners reach out to me with some stories, and I've pondered for a long time how to handle this. And but I've decided we need to talk about pornography and sex addictions and being single, basically. And because some listeners out there will have been in marriages where that was an issue, or they are now out in the dating scene and they're running across individuals with these issues, or they may have those issues themselves. And so I know when I was first divorced, I actually ended up on a date with someone, and I did not know that he had a sex addiction, but I kissed him too early, frankly, but I later realized after kissing him, I thought there's something missing here when we're kissing, and I could not figure out what it was. And I ended the relationship because something was missing. Well, later I ran into another individual with a sex addiction, and we went out a few times, but only as friends. And he was very upfront about it, and he told me, and I told him about my other experience, and he said, oh, yeah, with a sex addiction, the emotion is not there when you're having physical contact. And so you were not seeing the emotion in his eyes that you would usually see. And I thought, oh, okay. So Also, these two had both been excommunicated twice, and I didn't even know that was a possibility. I mean, I don't know, maybe I've been sheltered all of my life. I knew you could be excommunicated, but I didn't know it could happen twice. And so these are things that you're going to run into out there. And if you're out there dating, I think you need to know that it's out there and maybe have an idea of how to handle these situations when you run across them. And so first I wanted to talk about what a sex addiction is, because I know you're growing up, you heard that as kind of bandied about as a joke, a person's a nympho or whatever. And so you think this is someone that just really likes to have sex a lot. And it's considered sometimes like a positive. Oh, that's a good thing, right? This person has a really high sex drive. And now, having done some reading and having talked to people, I know that's not the case. And so, Jim, can you tell us what that means when someone has a sex addiction?
Well, I appreciate you taking on a difficult topic, because it's definitely very relevant to singles who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's definitely a challenge of our day that is just happening in perplexing proportions. As I've worked with this challenge for over the last 20 years, it's sad to see the heartbreak, the marriages that have been destroyed, the trust in families that have been destroyed. And I know it's just reached devastation in so many people's lives. So pornography and sexual addictions are when a person gets to a point where they are now out of control of their viewing of pornography or their sexual behavior. I think most professionals would say, if someone's saying they're struggling and can't stop viewing pornography, then they would also fall under the category of a sexual addict. There are probably people that have sexual addictions who don't view pornography, but that's probably a very rare thing. I think the best bet to go to is maybe to go to what President Dallin Oaks has said about it, so that we can get clear on kind of what is this challenge. And President Oaks kind of put things on a continuum for us. And so he said there is accidental exposure to pornography or sexual material. And so obviously that's going to happen to all of us. President Boyd K. Packer said, because of the media, you and I live inside the great and spacious building in our day. So we're all going to see inappropriate images and such like that. Sorry, I didn't know my clock was going to be.
Is that what that noise is? I heard it in the last episode, and I thought, is that someone at the front door? But anyway.
So there's, first of all, there's accidental exposure, and then probably many people who struggle with problems with pornography or with other sexual behaviors moved from accidental exposure, or maybe they just started with this next step, which is curiosity, which is it's normal and natural, especially for a young person, like a young boy especially, or maybe a young woman who finds something on a website to read. It's normal to be curious. And so most inquiring young children, if they stumble across something, it's not unusual for them to click on it. That does not mean that they have an addiction. Even if they've clicked on it multiple times or looked at it multiple times, it may just be curiosity use. Then we progress to a point where it becomes compulsive. And compulsive means that the person they're thinking about it a lot. It kind of becomes something that they start to feel a little bit preoccupied with, but it's not something that they do on a regular basis. It's something that they find themselves doing, and it's usually in just a rough moment or a difficult moment. But it's very difficult for them to stop thinking about it as well as stop returning to it. And if compulsion is not stopped, then it can move into what we would call addiction, where this is really where someone is maybe moving to that point that your example that you gave from those two dates experiences is now we're moving kind of past feeling, where it's starting to become something that the individual is starting to escalate. So when we talk about addiction, we're talking about someone who requires more of the activity to get the same effect. And so the person is increasing in their using, they're taking more risks, they're going to maybe more explicit websites, they're maybe doing some more risky sexual kind of things. And that's where we put in addiction. So we need to know that continuum, especially because that was taught by a prophet of God. We need to know that continuum because maybe some people have had curious exposure to pornography, but they're not an addict. Maybe someone is having some compulsive or has had a history of compulsion. And then there are probably people out there that have an addiction where it's a really escalating out of control thing. One of the things that has helped me the most with this is this phrase, and I believe it's probably been attributed first to Brad Wilcox, but he said he was working with a young man, and the young man said something to this effect: I first went to pornography to feel good. Now I go to it to not feel bad. And that can kind of indicate moving to a compulsion or an addiction. If a kid is looking at it out of curiosity, or if someone, even an adult, I guess, if they've never seen something before and then they click on it and it's curious, it's unlike anything you've ever seen or whatever, it's when it starts to change and it's no longer exciting or stimulating as much as it is, I'm doing this when I'm depressed, I'm doing this when I'm lonely, I'm doing this when I'm angry, when I'm discouraged, when I feel afraid, or whatever. I'm turning to this literature or to these pictures or to these sounds or to these, listening things or whatever that are pornographic in nature, and I'm doing it to not feel bad.
And so they basically do it to numb feelings.
Yeah, numb or escape are probably the two categories we would put it in. So numbing or escaping, and that's one of the characteristics, features of addiction. And then the more you numb, guess what you need? You need more of the escape. So that's why there's this escalation. So when a person gets into a point where they're experiencing negative consequences from it, they're experiencing more numbing, more absence of feeling, there's less substance to their ability to feel things as powerfully or whatever, then they have more of the substance, they escalate, they masturbate more often, they start engaging in more risky sexual kind of things. That's when we're really talking about addiction.
Wow. And also I want to mention that the church has a lot of material online about this. If you're wanting to read about it and get a better idea of what these addictions mean, there's like a whole website. I'll link to it under this episode. I can't remember what it's called. Addiction recovery, maybe?
They just updated it. So it's, if you go to the churchofjesuschrist.org and you type in pornography, it'll take you to Addressing Pornography, which is the church's website. You can also go to Addiction Recovery, and there's incredible resources, groups. There's manuals, lesson plans. There's how to teach a family home evening to your young children on this topic. I mean, there's just tons of resources that the church has to offer to help in a situation like this.
Yeah, one really neat thing that they have is they have videos on all the 12 steps, and they show a different story in each video of someone who's been dealing with that, with a specific addiction. I found that to be quite fascinating, and it kind of helped me understand a little bit better what goes on in the mind of someone who's dealing with an addiction, whatever it happens to be. There are a lot of similarities between the addictions, but I wanted to focus on these two because they happen to have a pretty big impact on when you're trying to have an interpersonal relationship with someone. Whereas a food addiction or a shopping addiction might not have the same impact when you're trying to date someone.
I mean, any addiction is bad, but this sure seems to be one that creates more personal challenges, both for the person who's struggling as well as the person who's maybe in a relationship with them, because we're really talking about trust. We're talking about the sanctity of relationships. We're talking about something that if we're progressing in a relationship, we're hoping to have a pure and virtuous and uplifting sexual relationship with someone that we're dating. And when we start introducing pornography into that, then that affects the very core of who we are, whether that be a woman who is going to doubt if she's attractive enough or good enough or virtuous enough or whatever enough if she's in a relationship with someone with a pornography addiction, or if it's a man married to a woman that has a problem with pornography or whatever, it's going to be, am I the person she's thinking of? Am I strong enough? Am I competent enough? Am I powerful enough, manly enough, or whatever kind of enough? So it really does undermine the fabric of trusting in an intimate relationship, which is why we're single and we're seeking that as we go forward trying to date.
Right, and that's something we're going to get to because the honesty part of it is huge.
Yeah.
I've heard someone say before, how do you know if an addict is lying? And they say their mouth is moving, right? And so it
exactly.
seems like when someone is in the grip of an addiction, they're out of necessity, they're lying. Because if they're being honest to you, then they're working on the addiction, right? And so it's when they're actively in the addiction that they are going to lie to you.
Yeah.
And you can't have a relationship with someone like that.
It's definitely, like the foundation of a relationship is going to be trust, trust and intimacy. And if someone is struggling so much, or if one of you listening is struggling so much with addiction that you can't be open and honest, then please go get help so that you can then begin to have. It is possible for people with a past history of pornography use or sexual addiction use to have very healthy, very wonderful relationships. But let's be honest that we need to be honest. And if you're struggling, you need to be honest and get help. And if you're with somebody who's struggling, there needs to be, opening up this communication where we can talk.
Right. And I think the odds of us finding someone in the dating world who has had at least a past history of addiction to pornography are very great. And this is, we talked on the last episode about not having deal breakers. And so, I think before I was married, I probably would have said, oh, I don't ever want someone who's had a porn addiction. That would be a deal breaker. Now, I don't think I would take that stance. I think I would say, it's like you said, we're living in the great and spacious building now. So I'm going to look around, I'm going to see really good saints who have had a history of porn addiction. So what I want is to know up front, though, if at some point in the relationship, I would need the other person, him, to open up, and if you're a man, her, to open up and say yes, because I can handle something that I know about. I can't handle something that I don't know about. But if I know about it, then, and if I know that this is something that you struggled with, I have all the information, and I know whether or not, first of all, is this all in the past? Or what are your triggers? What should I watch for? What should I be careful of if I decide to move forward with this relationship? But I have had men open up to me, honestly, even in phone calls before we've met, to let me know that they have had an addiction in the past. And I did date a man who shared with me that he had had an addiction in the past. But I knew the man that I was dating well enough to know that he was being honest with me that it was in the past. And so I don't think we need to rule out, oh, you've had an addiction, forget it. Because, well, first of all, good luck finding. There's a lot of people out there.
And then we'll get a date. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, there are really, honestly, the fact that pornography is being addressed in general conference and in the Ensign on a regular basis tells you it's very prevalent now. This is not something that only a few people are dealing with.
And have you really noticed that our leaders have stopped talking about if someone has seen pornography? They're saying when.
Yeah.
They're saying that when you're dating, you need to talk about this. Our leaders have specifically said, at President Ballard at BYU said specifically you should have a conversation about pornography with someone that you're dating, because it is an issue of our day. And if there are people out there who have been unscathed, they have managed to make it this far without ever seeing anything pornographic, then that is amazing and fantastic.
It is.
It's also very rare.
Yes.
And not everybody that has seen pornography is addicted to pornography. Not everybody that's looked at it for a period of time, and that can help us. But if we automatically disqualify someone because they said, and maybe there's better questions we can ask, and that's part of why we're doing this as well, is how do we have conversations about this in such a way that we learn what we need to learn?
Yeah, that's where I want to go next, because we've established the fact that it's a huge problem, that most everyone has at least seen or been exposed to pornography in some form. And so there's a high potential that someone that we've met or we're out with has either been compelled or maybe been in an addiction. So now that we know that that's a really good possibility, we need to figure out how do we talk about that. Because one of my thoughts was, how do we spot it? But maybe we don't spot it because we're on dates and we're not going to spot it. But we need to talk about it. Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, how many dates in, or,
Yeah.
and how do we approach this? Because it's not easy to, you don't want to sit across from someone there and say, so when's the last time you looked at pornography? And I want to say here that we're using the long form of the word because you corrected me before the episode, and I'm grateful that you did, that we don't say porn, we say pornography. And why is that?
I think what we look at is in the real world setting, porn is actually a slang term that the world uses to kind of talk about naked pictures.
Right.
Versus when our leaders and others talk about, professionals talk about, we use the whole term. We don't use a slang term. Maybe it gets to the name change thing that you're talking about. We use the full term because when we use the full term, then we emphasize the power of it. Pornography, President Dallin H. Oaks said pornography is not defined by its content, but by its intent. So music can be pornographic. Literature can be pornographic, so romance novels, websites that depict things in word form. It can be pictures. It can be pictures of people with clothes on. It can be ads, media ads, commercials. Pornography is defined by the intent of the person who made it. What are they trying to have happen there? And so when we look at it, we really want to move into helping people to really define it as it is. Pornography. Let's call it pornography because then we're being very clear about what it is.
Right. Thank you. And I know I feel like the porn is a worldly term that's used to kind of make light of, of course I look at that. Everyone looks at porn, right? And every time I see that on TV, I think, no, they do not. And we in the church are holding ourselves up to a higher standard. And so I like that we are clarifying and saying we are using the term pornography because it's not some fun thing that everyone, of course, is exposing themselves to on purpose. That's not who we are, and we're holding ourselves up to a higher standard.
And the other part of it is that we tend, when we say porn, we tend to loosely define that as pictures or videos of people naked doing sexual things.
Right.
That's porn.
You're right.
Pornography embraces any of the things, whether that be something you're doing on Snapchat or Tinder, or that's something that you're doing on Facebook or whatever. Pornography embraces all of the realm of inappropriate material with the intent to arouse sexual feelings.
Good.
The intent to arouse. So that also might help us as we're talking with someone is pornography for me might be different than pornography for somebody else. So we don't start measuring things in terms of degree. We start measuring things on what's happening and what's the intent of this material. And so it really can help us be more clear when we're communicating with people. Let's talk about pornography. So you might have a conversation about somebody's music choices, or pay attention to that when they pick you up for a date and you're driving somewhere. Are we listening to explicit pop music? Because that may be something important to look into.
Well, that would be one way to start a conversation, is if you hear that music in the car, when you get wherever you're going, you can sit down and talk about that. What do you think? I mean, what's a good way to raise this discussion? Say you're at that point, you're 3 or 4 dates in, and you feel like you're starting to connect with this person and you're starting to share. What do you think is a good way to start that conversation?
I love how you framed the question, which is you said when you're 3 or 4 dates in, which I don't know that there's a magic number, so I don't know that. But too often we want to do this on the first date.
Yeah.
Too often we want to do this online, whatever, and we want people to be we want people to be open about that. So we're basically saying we want you to answer a very vulnerable question truthfully when we don't really know each other.
Right.
So this is not a conversation for a first date. It's probably not a conversation for online, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think you want to see each other when you're having that conversation. Correct,
because how are you going to measure? So we're saying, we find out we're dating with someone or whatever, and we want to lie. We were talking about addicts and lies and stuff like that. Well, the whole nature of addiction involves lying. Right. That's how you get into addiction, is that you're keeping secrets and you're not telling somebody you're doing something and you're doing secret behavior. Well, just asking someone straight out on the first date or on a web page and saying, do you have a problem with pornography? The likelihood that you're going to get a helpful answer or whatever is not. But some people will say, well, I don't even want to go on a first date if I don't know the answer to that question. Well, the interesting thing is that you may not even know after the first or second date, because there's not enough trust and connection and respect to be able to kind of say, okay, I can know that this person's being honest with me. So what's happening, and I know it's different for men and women, because it's probably true. I don't know if there's any research on this, but probably the majority of women that are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who are single as a result of divorce, probably their spouse had a problem with pornography. I know that's not true in every case, but probably. Mm-hmm. So a lot of women have been hurt by this. Men have too. So we're not trying to say just women have problems, or just men have problems with pornography and their wives have to deal with it, or their women partners have to deal with it. It does happen in both ways, and that's important for us to realize. Even if you're a man, you need to be asking your partner that you're dating about their experiences with pornography. But what we're really looking at is we need some time period to get to know this person, so that when we open up this conversation, there is a feeling that we can now trust that. And that's going to come after having some experiences to lay the groundwork. If you ask them online, you have no experiences to know whether it's true. So you're no better off. Yeah. So they told you online that they don't have a problem with pornography, but you're no better off, because you're going to go on that first date, second date, or third date, or whatever, and you don't know if they told you the truth because you don't have history with them.
Yeah, that's the easiest thing in the world, to just type no.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They don't even see your face to know whether there's, your face matches.
And the addict mind is going to say, she's not going to go on a date with me. She's not going to go out with me. She'll never go out with me if I tell her the truth. And you know what? Before we go out, I can stop. And so then I won't be able to do that. And then when she asks me again, I'll be able to say yes. And the addict mind is going to play with that. Versus when you're on a relationship, you're face to face with somebody, and don't do this at Applebee's. Don't do this in a restaurant or whatever. This is something to have in a conversation where you're in a more private place, wherever that might be. Maybe you have that conversation at church sometime. Maybe you have that conversation at one of your homes or something like that. But this is a time where you say, if the relationship feels like it's going well, you've had several dates and stuff like that, and you feel like there's some of those braving principles we talked about in the last podcast, the dating part 2 podcast, dating coach part 2, go back and look at that and look at those braving principles, because then you're going to be able to say, hey, I think I'm really enjoying our relationship, and I'm enjoying what's been happening as we've gone on these couple of dates. And I just feel like, our leaders have said that we should talk about pornography. And then you can bring it up and then watch how they respond. And you need that. You need the body language. Do they hesitate? Do they immediately answer? Do they look away? Do they play with their phone? Do they change the subject? You need to look at that. But they may also be awkward and uncomfortable because it's a sensitive topic. It's vulnerable. But you need that face-to-face experience, body language experience, after having laid some groundwork of trust. And then we talk about it in that way.
All right. So let's say you've had the discussion, and let's just assume that this person's being honest. And they tell you that they look at pornography on a regular basis, but they don't feel like they're addicted to it. Let's just say that's one scenario. So maybe they have a compulsion. Maybe they do have an addiction, and they're just not being completely honest with themselves. How do you handle it at this point?
It's a great question. Actually, and maybe this is going to be backing us up a little bit, but how we ask is really significant here, which might help with this question that you're asking, because your question's brilliant. I remember Elder Oaks, or now President Oaks, gave a classic talk called Divorce. And he talked about divorce. Yeah. The last half of that talk was how to date successfully. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he said in there is the best way to avoid divorce when you're single is to marry well. And then he said, in order to marry well, you have to inquire well. And I love that phrase, because how we ask the questions. So when you're on a date with somebody and you've gone out for 3 or 4 times and you feel like there's some good stuff going on here, you do not ask somebody, have you had a problem with pornography? Because they can say yes or no.
Right. So we don't want a yes or no question.
A funny story of that, I was being interviewed for a church calling by a member of the state presidency. And he said, do you have a problem with pornography? And I said, yes.
And I don't like pornography. Yeah, I have a problem with that.
Look of horror on his face. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Jim Jacobs has a problem with pornography. And I said, because I saw the reaction on his face, and I said, yeah, and I hate this stuff. And I don't view it. But you see, what was he asking me? like that question is not helpful.
Right.
So when we inquire well in this particular thing, you shouldn't ask somebody a yes or no question. You should be thinking of an open-ended question. Open-ended questions might be, tell me about your experiences with pornography. Tell me about how you have struggled with pornography. I was on a date with somebody just recently, and the question was so powerful. She said to me, how or what do you do to stay free from pornography? She wanted to know what actions I take to keep myself free from pornography. Brilliant question, open-ended question. But these open-ended questions allow us to talk about our experiences. So sisters, if you ask the brother that you're on the date with, again, third or fourth or fifth, or when there's been some traction there, there's some trust, there's some body language, you understand this person. When you ask the question, tell me about your experiences with pornography. Tell me about your experiences with sexual behaviors and what's happened there. And then answer honestly and ask her the same question. Mm-hmm. Tell me about yours. Because what we want to do is create a trusting dialogue where we're both opening up and talking about our experiences with media, our experiences with pornographic stuff, our experiences with perhaps sexually addicted behavior or whatever. The question of, do you have a problem with pornography? Yes or no? When's the last time? If they say yes, then what do you ask next? Yeah. Well, when's the last time you had a problem with pornography? It's been a while. It's not helpful. Yeah. Let's get to open-ended questions. Let's inquire well. Talk about your experiences with inappropriate media. Talk about your experience with controlling your own sexual appetites and asking them about controlling their own sexual appetites.
So if someone shuts down at that point, then either they're not willing to be honest with you, or you haven't reached that point in the relationship where they're willing to be honest, but there's obviously something going on. If someone doesn't want to answer that question, or if they get defensive.
What I like about what you said is that it doesn't automatically mean that they have a current problem with pornography. Mm-hmm. What we know about anybody is we have a hard time talking about sex.
Yeah.
We have a hard time, the most commonly thing that married couples, when they come in for counseling, want somebody to bring up sex because it's so uncomfortable for them to bring it up. So I guess what I look at it is, it doesn't mean that they're being dishonest. It doesn't mean they're lying to you. It means that they're uncomfortable, which means that you need to ask more questions. Mm-hmm. I might say something like this. If I asked a woman that I was dating, tell me about your experiences with pornography, and they kind of put their head down and started to hesitate and kind of stumble and stuff like that, I might follow up with, I can see that you're uncomfortable about this. Is this something that we can talk about? Yes, that's a yes or no question. But if she says yes, she might say, yes, I'm just uncomfortable with it because this is not something that I feel really good about talking about, but I'm willing to talk about it.
Well, that means dating a counselor must be pretty interesting.
What's that?
I said dating a counselor must be pretty interesting.
I don't know. I try not to bring out my counselor hat when I'm dating because that tends to scare people away.
Yeah.
That's not really who I am.
I think I would be like, is he trying to help me with my issues?
This is being the dating coach on the podcast talking about how do we inquire well, right. Which is point out that this is an uncomfortable topic.
Yeah.
Hey, this is an uncomfortable topic, but we've been asked and told by our church leaders, prophets, seers, and revelators that we need to talk about this. Can we please talk about our experiences with pornography? Now, one of the things you could do if you're courageous enough, one of the best ways to start this conversation, again, if you're feeling there's some trust there, you're feeling there's some connection there, you're really liking your experiences so far, is open up and share your own.
Yeah.
Start with your own vulnerability. Vulnerability begets vulnerability. So if you start out the conversation by saying, you know what, I'd like to talk about my experiences with pornography so that we can have a conversation about it, because I know it could affect our future or our relationship together. Here's what happened for me. I was exposed to whatever, and you go through and you explain kind of what's going on and then what you've done about it. And then you say, do you have any questions about that? Let them ask you questions and talk honestly about it. But you've opened it by being vulnerable and that helps now make it more comfortable for that person to reciprocate. So share your own experiences. So if you're a spouse whose former partner, if you're an ex-spouse whose former partner had problems with pornographic material, then you might start with that's your experience. Maybe you really haven't seen much or had experience with it, but your partner does. So you could start with that, and you could be vulnerable and say, and I'm a little bit scared about dating because I'm afraid of the effects of pornography because of what they did in my previous marriage. And here's my experiences. Will you please tell me about yours? And so opening it up, being vulnerable, being real, being authentic. If we want them to be authentic and honest with us, let's start by being authentic and honest with them. But we've got to get rid of the yes or no, did you, have you kind of questions, and move to tell me about your experiences. Now, when you said the question of somebody says, I don't think it's a problem, I'm not addicted or whatever, you wanted me to say, what do I do at that point? And I think most people want me to say, end the relationship or whatever. That would perfectly be fine. If that's a situation for you where you say, well, I'm not comfortable with that answer, or I'm not comfortable with what that means, then you could in the relationship say, you know what, I love you, this has been fun. Well, maybe you won't say I love you, but you'll say, this has been fun, I've enjoyed this. I'm not sure that I can continue the relationship based on this information. Don't lecture them, preach to them, tell them it's an addiction. Don't try to be an expert on pornography in that moment and go, well, don't you think if you can't stop that's, you're looking at that, going back to the braiding things we talked about in the dating podcast, is that integrity for you? And are they showing integrity? If they tell you they're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and they're an active member of the church and they're whatever, but they tell you, yes, I'm viewing pornography and I don't think it's an addiction, it might be a compulsion. It might be an integrity issue. So you have the option of saying, thank you very much, this has been nice, I hope we can stay friends, but I prefer not to date anymore. Or maybe it is compulsive, and maybe you can inquire well and ask a couple more questions. Tell me what you mean by that. Help me understand that answer. Because for me, if it seems like if someone's viewing pornography, that's confusing to me what you said, help me know more, and maybe you'll learn more about them. A lot of men have never talked about their pornography problems, very much with anybody. They may have talked to their bishop, they may have talked to their former spouse, or if they've never been married before, they may have never talked to anybody about it. And so it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, it's vulnerable. So the more we can open up that question, I think it's vulnerable for anybody. I mean, women who have problems with pornography, that is one of the most shameful things for a woman in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to struggle with, because it's a man problem. It's a selfish problem that men have. To be a woman, oh my gosh, women aren't supposed to be doing this. Women aren't supposed to be looking at pictures of people having sex or videos or whatever kind of thing. And so it can be such a shame-producing topic. So let's make it as safe as possible. So be curious about it. And please don't ever shame somebody. If they were honest enough to tell you that they have had a problem with pornography, please just don't outright get up and reject them in that moment. Let's be compassionate. Let's be Christ-like. And it doesn't mean we have to keep dating them. Doesn't mean we have to go out with them again or plan a wedding or whatever kind of thing. But let's be compassionate and recognize this is a hard challenge. It's very difficult to stop viewing pornography or engaging in compulsive or addictive sexual behaviors. But let's inquire well, find out what we need to know, and then we can make good decisions from a dating standpoint.
Great. No, that's awesome. That's very helpful. And I hope that a lot of people take that to heart, because it is something we need to know up front. And I like your open-ended question. That's actually good for a lot of things. But no, you're right. It's a hard thing to talk about sex with people, especially when you're dating someone. It's, you know.
And really, we need to have, really, when you're dating, I know that's not the purpose of this podcast, but we really need to talk about sexual history if we're a remarriage situation. We need to talk about our sexual relationship. Like, one of the biggest things that we see both with newlyweds, young single adults who've never been married before, as well as older adults who are remarrying or whatever, is they never talk about sex. We need to talk about how often do you want to have sex? What are the yes and no behaviors? What's okay? What's not okay? We need to have conversations about that. And pornography is part of a larger conversation. Sexual addiction is part of a larger conversation about sexuality. One last thought that I would throw out there related to the conversations about this is that what are you looking for when you have this conversation? So when you say, okay, I'm going to ask these open-ended questions, I'm going to come up with them. What are you looking for? Because if someone has a history and they're honest with you and they tell you they have a history, does that mean you should go forward in the relationship or not? Well, maybe that depends. So follow-up questions should really be gauging, where is this person at with that? So the question I was asked on a date recently, what do you do to stay clean? Brilliant question. What actions or behaviors? Because now what you're gauging is how does this person handle it? How do they respond to it? What are they doing? So men, especially, when you get this question on a date, and you're going to get it, I promise you, you're going to get it on your date. And if you don't, then you bring it up. And then please bring it up earlier. You be the one that brings it up. If you want to impress a woman and you've had a history with some pornography or whatever, which probably most men have, bring it up. You be the one that brings up the conversation. If you really want to help this woman trust you, if you really like her, you bring it up. But if when you're talking about it, please be open, be honest. If you give vague answers, you will get vague trust from this woman. And really that's true for the women as well. But please give a specific answer. So I was very specific about what I do to deal with those temptations, or if I'm looking at the computer and something pops up on my Facebook feed that's inappropriate or whatever, how do I handle that? The more vague you are, the more you are going to create distrust and worry. And even if you're being honest, you will have the appearance of lying. And vague answers create a sense. Annette, you said a profound principle. I can handle the truth. I can handle knowing what's going on. So I've known couples where they have chosen to get married even though one of the partners they knew had a sexual addiction from the beginning. But they knew the truth, and they had already created a plan to address that truth. I actually have a family member in that situation. Pornography came up in their dating. They talked about it. They discussed it. They talked about what they were doing. They talked about what they needed from each other to get through that. They talked about how do we imagine that we're going to deal with this in the future. And they chose to get married knowing that one of them had compulsive and addictive pornography use. But it was because they talked and they communicated. They discussed, what are you doing to take care of yourself and to try to be temptation free? What are you doing when you slip up? How are you handling that? How do you envision me being a part of that? How can I support you? What do you expect from me in terms of dealing with that? What kind of steps do you take? And get the answers from that, because what we're really looking at is this someone who's having a change of heart? Is this someone who's working on it? Is this someone who sees this as a challenge and they're taking it on? Not somebody that just goes, yeah, I sometimes slip up. Like, how? That's not helpful. No. I sometimes slip up and I hate it and I get mad at myself and I struggle for a couple of days and then I get back on track. No, I want to hear the steps that they've taken, the actions, because I want to know more than anything when I'm dating somebody thinking about moving towards potential marriage, I want to know their heart. And all of us struggle with something that would be hard for us to give up today. If someone told us today, if the prophet in General Conference next week says that you have to give up the behavior that you struggle with most, so if the prophet says you have to give up chocolate.
No, don't say that.
I'm not going to be able to do that in one day.
No.
Like, I'm not going to be able, that's going to take me time. That's going to be a struggle. That's going to be a battle for me. And so we need to recognize that all of us have challenges that if we were told we had to give them up today, they would be difficult for us. But what matters most if we're looking at a marriage relationship is, where is their heart? And can they talk about this? Even if it's awkward for them to talk about it, even if it's uncomfortable, even if they stutter, we're looking for, can they be open about it? Can they be honest about it? Can we develop that kind of openness? And like you said, that's going to happen many dates in, because you don't really know anything online and you don't know anything in that first date. Please don't ruin a first fun date by asking about pornography on the first date. Yeah. I've had that happen, and it kind of does ruin the date. I mean, I'll answer it because I'm going to be honest, but it does kind of sour the taste. Is like, I don't even know you. Like, this is my first experience meeting you, and I'll tell you the truth because I know you need to know that. But I really wish that we had some experience together first, because it's awkward enough as it is, but it's even more awkward on a first date when we're just trying to get to know each other.
Well, and if a first date, if you both kind of decide we're just going to be friends, there was no reason to have that discussion. There was no reason for you to have that knowledge. Yeah. I don't need to know. from my guy friends. I don't know most of my guy friends have what their history is with pornography.
And they don't know yours either.
They don't know mine either. I don't want to know. I don't need to know.
They're still on the front porch, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Or they're in the living room.
They're in the living room.
This is a more intimate conversation on a very intimate topic, a very vulnerable topic.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have that face-to-face after experiences where you feel some sort of confidence that this is a relationship that you would maybe like to move forward. And then you're going to add to those conversations, and this might be other podcasts or whatever, but how do you talk about money? How do you talk about kids, blended families, step parents? How do you handle other sexual activities and experiences? How are we going to handle retirement? Whatever. It's a part of the larger conversations that we should be having, and it's crucial. It's a crucial conversation.
Well, how do you feel about premarital counseling?
So premarital counseling is fantastic. As a matter of fact, it's one of the most brilliant things that you can do. The only caveat you have to have when you look at premarital counseling, as a counselor, when I get asked to provide premarital counseling, I'm very happy to do this, but I tell the couple up front that you need to understand this one thing. If I do premarital counseling with you and you decide not to marry each other, that is success.
Ah, yes.
Because you learned something about each other that helped you to be able to communicate. But yeah, if you're talking about something like pornography or sexual addiction, and maybe it's been present in there, premarital counseling can be brilliant, because before you even get married, you're learning strategies and stuff like that. I encourage couples that are dating to there's different online assessments you can take.
Yeah.
There's one for free that was originally started out of BYU that you can take. There's some that are like $10 or $20 that you can take that will help you know, here's the topics you should talk about. Again, you're going to do that later on in the relationship, like 5 months in, 6 months in. Maybe you're going to do one of these online assessments or see a premarital counselor so that you can get an assessment on what areas might be hard for you or struggles for you. And then you learn how to work through those. You learn how. So premarital counseling could help so much. Most people that do it and then ultimately get married say it was the best investment that they ever made, because they were able to now bridge those awkward conversations, talk about vulnerable topics, talk about hurts from the past and how to keep them from infecting the present. So definitely a good thing.
Yeah, I know you don't like the deal maker thing, but I decided that I am going to require premarital counseling before I marry again, just because I would much rather do it on the front, on the pre side, than get to the post side and say, oh, yeah, I mean, I think marital counseling is great. I was in it before. Our marriage was not savable, but I knew I did everything in my power to make it work, right? And so I think you're right. That's a really good point. If you go through premarital counseling and realize you don't want to get married, consider that a good thing, because you just saved yourself another divorce or a miserable marriage.
Let's prepare and prevent rather than repair.
Yes, thank you.
Or have to, let's put the fence around the cliff rather than the ambulance down the valley. Yeah, it's intelligence to seek help. And if you're wanting to know if this is a good thing, I mean, you also, sometimes people, instead of premarital counseling, they'll do like an art and science of love workshop. It's like a weekend workshop. The two of you can go to it. You want to be seriously committed, because it's like $600 or $700 to do it. But they have these here in Colorado. Message me or look me up on Facebook. I can tell you who does those and where you can locate those. But you can go spend a weekend in an art and science of love workshop, and you can learn so much about communication stuff. And that may be actually cheaper than premarital counseling at $150 a session or something like that. Maybe a $600 weekend for you. But yeah, let's be intelligent about it. Let's read books together. Let's talk about it. The people I know that have the best marriages are the ones who have approached it with intelligence, communication, education, honesty, transparency. And that's especially true with our topic today of pornography and sexual addiction.
Right. And so, because we're about out of time, just to wrap up, if you do have this discussion with someone and one of you has either an addiction, a current addiction, or a past addiction, a past addiction, I don't think we need to spend too much time on, because if it really is in the past, I don't think you need to do a lot of work with it. But if someone admits that they are working through a current addiction, and you decide you're going to go ahead and try a relationship with this person anyway, what do you say? What's your best advice as far as how to navigate that, or what? how to work through that.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the question, and please, you need to make your own decisions as to whether or not you can go forward with it or whatever. I think what you're really looking for, if your current dating partner and you want to stay with this current dating partner, has opened up to you and shared that they have an addiction, a sexual addiction or pornography addiction, or even the compulsive use, if they're using pornography compulsively or masturbating compulsively or something like that, or looking at romance novels or whatever, compulsively. If you're going to go forward with that, you need to go slow. You need to be having the conversation. This would be a great one to have premarital counseling on, but you need to have conversations about how are we going to handle this? How are we going to talk about it? In what ways are we going to structure those conversations? How am I going to know? How are you going to let me know that you're struggling? And then what is my role in supporting you in that? And what do you want me to do in that? Because it's really a vulnerable situation. So I'm going to say man and woman. Man has the problem with pornography. Woman is the one that's hurt by it or whatever kind of thing. So they're both vulnerable in that. So when he has to tell her that he's slipped up or that he's struggling, she's now vulnerable because she's hurt and she's afraid and she's worried about what it's going to mean. And she's also probably going to worry about if she's attractive enough or whatever enough and if he really loves me or whatever kind of thing. So we've got this hard situation. So both of you need to talk about what do you expect from each other? What do you need from each other in that situation? So you need to lay a lot of groundwork on how are we going to manage this and eliminate it from our life. There's some great books that you can read on that, some great topics on how to pornography-free your marriage or how to make love last kind of thing. And so get some help, look up for some research, get a marital counselor or premarital counselor, and really you got to talk about how are we going to handle it. Don't just naively go, okay, I know you have a problem with pornography, let's keep going. No, it's like, what are we going to do? What do you expect of me? How can I support you? Here's what I need from you. Let's really, you got to open it up even more. You got to dig into it even deeper. You might even have to get into where are you struggling on your phone versus the computer, at work versus at home, on, how is this impacting everything in your life? We need to know as much as possible so then we can talk about what we're going to do about it.
So total honesty, a plan, and professional help. I would not even take that on without professional help.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And since you said the total honesty thing, just to be real clear about that, there's no such thing as total honesty in one moment. Even if we're just talking about ourselves as a person, honesty is an unfolding as there's more trust developed, as there's more experiences developed. So be cautious about this idea of total honesty. It's total honesty, meaning right now I am open with you and I'm telling you everything that I know right now. The reality is when we look at things again and again and again, our perspective can change or whatever. As I'm more honest and more honest and more honest, I'm starting to really recognize more about myself. But that doesn't mean I was lying in the past. And also, as we develop trust, if you've only been dating 5 or 6 times and then you have this pornography conversation, total honesty may be at five dates.
Right.
5 dates honesty. That's total honesty at 5 dates.
Okay.
As you get to know me a little bit more, then I may share a little bit more, and so on. That's normal and natural in every relationships. Honesty is a progressive thing where we begin to open up more of our world. If you ever feel like somebody's closing you out, that's something to talk about and look at. But people can be completely honest and have not shared everything with you. Okay. I mean, on a 2-hour date, you're not going to share everything. It's not possible.
Right. Well, let's say they're doing their best to be honest with you.
Yeah, correct. So, the striving to be honest, right. Demonstrating honesty is maybe a better way to look at it. Instead of total or complete honesty, it's can you tell that they're demonstrating honesty and integrity in the way that they answer those questions. I think I demonstrated that on my date when she said, how do you stay clean from this? How do you keep yourself from it? I wasn't uncomfortable at all. I mean, again, it's an awkward topic and I prefer to talk about something else on a date, but it's opening up and just saying, hey, this is what I'm trying to do.
Right.
This is what I strive to do.
And that you remember that you're in a dating relationship and you're free to leave that relationship at any time. Yeah. And just because you started down a road with someone doesn't mean you are obligated to keep going down that road. It may be too much for you. It may be that there's some other part of the relationship that you don't like. And so I want to tell that to some of my listeners that have seemed like they've gotten trapped in these relationships and they felt like they were responsible for the other person's addiction, and they're not. And that's why I think professional help is so important.
Go listen to the Dating Coach 2 podcast about Braving.
Yes.
You want somebody who's accountable and responsible and reliable And really, for any reason, dating is about trying somebody out.
Yeah.
And if you're just friends, that's okay. If you decide you want to do something, if you change your mind, if something's hard for you or you can't do it, there's nothing wrong with you. That's intelligence. To go, I don't think I can handle this. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. That means there's something right with you. To admit that you can't handle that, you know, that's okay. I probably couldn't handle somebody who had a terrorist background in their history. I mean, whatever. I mean, it's okay.
Yep. Good. This has been an excellent discussion. I thank you very much.
You bet. My pleasure.
And if people want to contact you, and especially if someone decides that they may go down this road, they can give you a call and get your assessment.
For a free consultation, go to jimrjacobs.com. There's a link on there that you can click a button, or that my phone number is right there. There's an email address right there. Whatever works for you, please contact me for a free consultation. If you decide that it could work, that I could help, I'm happy to do that. If you decide not to, then I'm happy to try to steer you in a direction to be helpful. Great,
thank you. And if you want to ask me, if you want to ask Jim questions for a future episode, email me at Annette@AnnetteTalks.com. or go to my Facebook page, Facebook.com/Annette Talks. Comment on this podcast at AnnetteTalks.com. Just reach out to me or to Jim or to somebody. There are lots of great counselors out there, lots of help. The church website, like we mentioned, is wonderful. I will include some links after this podcast as well that you can click on. So thank you for listening. Again, I'm on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube. Thank you. Let me know if you come up with another name for this podcast. In the meantime, thank you for listening to LDS Unmarried Life, where singles gather.
I'm gonna bloom where I'm planted. I won't take things for granted. Come what may, bring it on. I'm gonna love it.